All right, you're live.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to Drawn from the Vault, our Toys for Tots WDWNT charity marathon special for 2017. Today, we are doing something a little bit out of order. We're not going with one of the Disney classics from the 40s where we should be. We are skipping all the way to 1983 and Mickey's Christmas Carol, an instant holiday classic when it came out. But there's a lot of history behind A Christmas Carol and a lot more Disney Christmas carols to talk about. So even though it's a 24-minute short, this is going to go for a little bit. Today we have our panel. Uh, I'm Ron Deanna. We have our first timer here, Ben Harris, because why
Hi,
not?
folks.
And I forgot I am controlling the camera as well, so this is going to be a little stressful for me with
You want to pass that to me?
uh, I don't know how, but I'm also going to be doing some. I got to control because I'm also going to be doing some share screen stuff here with
Okay,
some
sure.
images. Patrick Packett,
I have a lower third.
two, and Laurel Levine.
Hello.
Most of you, this might be your first time seeing her. Laurel's my wife, and she started the show with me, and she, helps me with the writing and editing. So welcome her. All right. So today we are starting a long time ago with the birth of Charles Dickens in February 7th, 1812, in Portsmouth, England. He was the second child of a naval clerk, John Dickens. The early years of Charles's life were fairly normal until his father was sent to the Marshalsea, I think that's how you pronounce it, debtor's prison in 1824 for a debt of just over £40, which is about £4,000 in today's dollars, or about $5,000-6,000. They don't quite translate the same. Pound was worth about $5 back then. Now it's somewhere around $1.50 to $1.60 usually. I didn't look at the most recent rate because that's not that important. Um, when his father was put in prison, young Charles was forced to work in a workhouse, Warren's blacking warehouse, and he jarred boot blacking, which is basically shoe polish kind of thing. That was everybody was wearing black boots at the time, so it was a fairly big business. And he would be staying with a family friend while his mother and his siblings went to stay with his father in the debtor's prison. His father was released a few months later. Charles wasn't able to earn the £42, obviously, in just about 6 months, when his father inherited some money from a grandmother who had passed. Uh, but his mom didn't want him to leave the blacking warehouse right away, so he stayed there for a little bit uh, until he went back to school and spent 2 years. He later became a law clerk at the age of 17, and this is where he learned shorthand and started becoming a reporter. He would report on different legal issues around England and London at the time. So there's a lot of stuff you could see where Dickens came from that would be, taken as autobiographical in a lot of his novels. I mean, there's a lot of Oliver Twist, David Copperfield in these early years of Dickens' life. So here's a picture of Charles as he was later in his years. I don't think we found any from when he was a kid, but just wanted to put that up here. So does Laura? You read a lot more about Dickens' early life in some of these books. Is there anything I'm really missing here?
No, I was pretty sure it was 42 pounds that his father went to jail for, but you were pretty close on the money there. Um, really, you kind of got it all on the mark. I got nothing. You're good.
I know it was also to a baker. So
I like it
that's
better that it's a debt to a baker than a banker.
no, I think it was a baker. I don't know how he got to that debt. He really wasn't listed as a man with a lot of vices, and I think even Charles just said he was just kind of a spendthrift. He just spent money kind of willy nilly, and a naval clerk was he didn't make a lot of money. The average wage for like the equivalent of like what Bob Cratchit, like an underpaid, um, just general, just subs like a little above like home like subsistence salary would be about £40 a year. His dad was making close to 400, so it was just money in, money out. Basically, they said if he made £10 in a week, he always spent 11.
Yeah.
And he was a giving person and things like that, but it was just he had no control when it came to those kind of things.
I know that there was a lot of question as to why they were living paycheck to paycheck. I had a hard time finding any sources that actually confirmed whether it was like alcoholism, if he was constantly going to bars and spending the money, or if he was gambling, or there. I had difficulty finding out exactly what it was that was why they had difficulty holding on to money. Maybe it was that his dad just kept spending money frivolously, which kind of would make a little bit of sense from some of the sources, even though that's a little less specific than maybe alcoholism or something like that.
I think he just wanted to live as a slightly more of a gentleman than he could afford.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to be, a little bit more in the upper middle class by English definitions than where he actually was. But as I said, it had a profound effect on who Dickens would be later in life. So, as he's been a law clerk, he then spent 4 years reporting on the courts, but he wasn't really intent on making this his career. In 1832, at the age of 20, Dickens had an audition for the Covent Garden Theatre, but missed it because he had a cold. At this time, this was before the theater reform came in a few years later. There were only 2 theaters that were really licensed as legit theaters. Everything else had to be like a variety show or some sort of morality play. But the Covent Garden Theatre was one of the 2 theaters in London that could put on what we would call legitimate theater at the time. So it was something prestigious, and he always wanted to be an actor, but thankfully for us, this didn't work out. The next year, he submitted his first story to creatively titled Monthly Magazine, and the story was entitled A Dinner at Popular Walk.
Wow. Could all of that be any more vanilla?
So British.
I didn't mention all these publications that he, wrote for or edited for over the years, but they were just like, if the publisher was Bob, it was Bob's Monthly or Bob's Evening Journal. They really weren't creating anything too great. But then again, these are the first real publications.
Yeah.
Even the novel is a fairly new type of literature at the time. I know that different people have said it's different books in the 1700s. They came from like travelogue stories like Robinson Crusoe to even like more fantasy satire things like Gulliver Swift was still a travelogue, but those are kind of the first novels that weren't being called novels at the time.
Right. We're also still talking about a time where probably a good half of the population in England didn't know how to read. So publications were still on the brink of infancy even then, just getting popular writing out there. It's really amazing when you think about the fact that you have somebody writing specifically about people in poverty when a good chunk of them probably couldn't even read the material. But it's just so advanced, ahead of his time.
There is some stats we'll get to about kind of how widespread his works became at the time, but it was estimated that the literate population of England was somewhere between 300 and 500,000. So, these numbers are going to seem kind of small by publishing standards, but not when we get later on. And then, even today, with, the print media not being as big as it was, these numbers are just going to seem huge. The story he wrote for Monthly Magazine was entitled A Dinner at Popular Walk, and this led to a regular reporting gig thanks to his mother's brother. I got him the job at the Mirror of Parliament, reporting on the House of Commons, and then elections around the country for another publication, again titled The Morning Chronicle. So you you can see
So
why
many
someone
original names.
with Dickens, flair for the way he describes things, really came out of nowhere. It seems. The Dinner or Popular Walk. He wrote all these things under the pseudonym Boz. Was a mispronunciation of his younger brother's nickname. I think it was like Augustus or something like that, where it just the brother couldn't pronounce it, so it came out as Boz, and he just took it. They were published as what were called a series of sketches. These aren't drawings, obviously, but like profile pieces on individuals or places, like a human interest story on the news, or
I
like
mean,
a
he was
puff
almost
piece.
like Yelp, right?
No, it's a little bit more of like at the end of the news broadcast,
Oh,
you
okay,
get
yeah, more puff piece than
Editorial.
Yeah.
the Sunday lifestyle section.
Okay. All right. Cool.
Yeah, these were actually collected and published as a book called Sketches by Boz by 1836. They were hugely popular, and at the time, publishers really wanted to just put anything in a bound copy.
Fair. Before we move on too much further, a dinner at Popular Walk. Do we know what that's about? Like what the plot for that was, or anything like that?
I think it's kind of there's a lot of these were just he would talk about like like he would like this is what the aristocracy were doing this night, or these are the the moneyed classes were doing. They were really just lifestyle pieces. I don't know what it was. I don't know what Popular Walk was. There was so much to research on Dickens.
Just to be clear, I'm pretty sure it's a dinner at Poplar Walk.
Oh, okay.
That would make a lot more sense.
Sorry,
yeah.
Slight typo there, sweetie. But yeah, so it's a dinner at Poplar Walk, and well, I don't have a whole lot of information on the content. But it wasn't. But it was included in the Sketches by Boz book.
Yeah, I think there was somewhere around like somewhere between 20 and 40 put out in that first book. In 1836, when this book came out,
Ron, I hate interrupting, but your volume on your microphone is jumping all over the place. I think it might be Skype interfering with you. If you go take a quick look in Skype's tools options.
I have Skype off. I'm not using.
Oh, you've got Skype off. Oh gosh, I've got no idea what could be possibly doing this to you. It's going all over the place. I noticed the chat noticed it too.
Why? Because it was using a different microphone. Is that better for?
No, it's still happening, honey.
It's still happening a little bit.
Huh.
Do you want to unplug and plug back in?
No, sometimes that'll like just kill my audio altogether. But I can try that.
I think it got better. Hold on. Do some more talking words.
Is this a little better?
Yeah, I think you were right. I think
you got it.
Picking up the wrong microphone because it was getting the volume was moving as you were moving. So now that I think it's on your headset and we're good.
Okay, yeah, I've got 3 microphones. I've got a boom mic on my desk that I wasn't using, and I have the mic on the camera. So it was probably.
Oh, this is so much better. Yeah, you're fine.
All right,
we're good.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
All right, so we're still in 1836, right around the time Sketches by Boz was published. Dickens began work on his first serialized novel. Most of his books came out in a monthly or weekly format in a publication. This is still done in some ways. I think one of the most famous of recent years was The Green Mile in was it the late 90s that Stephen King published his novel in like 6 weekly segments. So it's very similar to that, but these were even shorter. These would be published in like if they were weekly, they were like 16 pages. If they were monthly, they were like 30 to 50 pages. And he wouldn't write it all at once and go forward. He would write it as he goes, and he would get paid per installment. This first novel was the Pickwick Papers with the publishers Chapman and Hall. By the end of this run, he was selling 40,000 copies per issue. And as I said, the maximum estimated literate population in England was under 500,000. So that's about 10% of anyone who could read is reading this book. and this is his first fictionalized work.
It's crazy.
Yeah. At the same time, he also took up the editor job at Bentley's Miscellany, which is, a publication published by someone named Bentley. It was another monthly literary magazine. And he also married the daughter of another publication, the Evening Chronicle, Catherine Hogarth. It was said he was actually more into her younger sister, which is one of those things you hear about all the time. But there was never really any hints of impropriety there. But the younger sister did die in Dickens' arms in 1839.
Inspiring the Cutting Crew to write a song about it. No, I'm back on mute.
Right after finishing the Pickwick Papers, he began work on Oliver Twist, which peaked at about the same 40,000 readership. I think we're a little more. I'm sure most of us have heard of Pickwick Papers, but I think we're all much more familiar with Oliver Twist. I mean, think of all the musical and the Disney movie Oliver and Company is pretty much taken straight from that. I know one of the characters in Oliver Twist, Fagin, was actually the name of a child he worked with at the bootblacking company, but had issues with. So that was kind of his revenge there. The next book was Nicholas Nickleby, and debuted ahead of the other books that started with 50,000 readers. These both, had a lot of autobiographical moments of Dickens' life. His obsession with his time at the workhouse, even though it was a very short time in an otherwise fairly privileged life at the time. It was his next book, The Old Curiosity Shop, that truly made Dickens famous throughout England, with the circulation peaking at over 100,000 per publication. Which is, as we said, that's 1 in 5 people who could read had that book on them every issue.
And that was The Old Curiosity Shop?
Yep, which has a Disney Channel movie that came out in the 90s. It was a miniseries. Was it Ustinov? Was the star? Laurel? We watched part of this. It's not the most interesting story, I will say that, especially if you know kind of the ending.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't remember.
So, but the book was so popular. There was a cliffhanger where the young character, Little Nell, who's the I'd say like preteen, early teen protagonist, traveling around the country with her grandfather to escape an evil moneylender. Another Dickens theme there. She's very sickly at the end of one book, and when the books were coming into America, people were sitting on the docks yelling to the people on the boat, "What about Little Nell? What about Little Nell?" They couldn't even wait to get the books off the boat. They had to know if she lived or died. Spoiler, she doesn't make it.
Oh.
Yeah. As I said, these circulation numbers are for the peaks of the serialized versions of the books in England. All the books were published originally monthly and weekly, and they were bound and sold as collected copies. These also sold in the thousands, and these were a little more expensive, nicely bound. What we think of a kind of prestige hardcover book would be today. That's not it. There were also illegal copies of these books going around. Some were just straight copies, particularly in America, where the copyright laws were in existence, but they were only being really enforced to protect American authors. They didn't really care about foreign authors. They rather have the Americans making the money. So there would be one company that was licensed to sell them here, but then the day they got the copy, they'd be taken to another printer, and someone would just print them out straight away.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's just impressive that they could just get away with that and not have any repercussions for it.
We can get a little bit to that later. But even in England, there were these knockoff copies where people would change a word or two here, change some character names, but the basic story was exactly the same. And these were both plays and written works. And at the time, Dickens wasn't really focusing on these. It was happening to all the authors. And the plays, like, the second these books came out, there'd be multiple versions running around. And as I said, there's the legit theater, but then there were the other places that were doing them as part of these like vaudeville scenes because they'd just be doing the segment that just got published. They weren't even doing the whole book. At one point during its publication run, Oliver Twist had 6 different plays running in England. And they were all unlicensed.
Good grief.
And sometimes people would do the whole play and then make up the ending as they were going on. Kind of, I think of like Game of Thrones now. It's just completely diverged.
Wow. That's just so different from how things would be now. Like you'd be getting cease and desist letters almost immediately if you did that nowadays.
Oh yeah, and Dickens makes this one of his missions. But at the time, he was so, it was making him famous, and it was making people driven to buy his versions of the books too. So he was actually going to see these plays and things.
And Ron, you were right. It's Peter Ustinov who plays the main character in Disney's 2-part series for the Old Curiosity Shop. It was aired on Disney Channel. Yeah, we actually were able to watch a copy of it. I'll be really fair with you. It was super boring. I imagine, though, reading it is probably better. The actual filming of this not very good. It wasn't edited amazingly. It was obviously just a cheap made-for-TV kind of movie. It's very slow. They didn't really use all the good one-liners from the book, from what I was gathering. So, I mean, that's part of what we look for in traditional Dickens, is really great one-liners, memorable moments of literature, and the movie just didn't really carry that really well. But I imagine reading the serialized version of the book was much more interesting than watching this unfortunate Disney Channel miniseries.
Ron, you're muted.
Yep. So here's like one of the original, and these were illustrated as well. So this is one of the original illustrations from Old Curiosity Shop. That's Little Nell with the moneylender Quilp. So just want to show like these are some of the things, and here is the original illustration for Oliver Twist.
Oliver,
please, sir, want some more?
Please, sir, can I have some more?
So yeah, these people got some visuals even as they went on. So Dickens had a tolerance for these knockoffs until Christmas Carol. We'll get to the reasons why that changes in a little bit. After Old Curiosity Shop, his next book was Barnaby Rudge, which was not really well received, and neither was I don't know what Master Humphrey's Clock is. It was mentioned as something published around the same time, but it's not one I actually ever heard of. They did okay. I mean, even at this point, Dickens was such a household name; people were just buying them because his name was on them. But after these didn't do so well, he took some time off to visit America. He was going to write a travelogue, which actually came out as American Notes for General Circulation. But he didn't like his visit to America. Part of it was all the evils he saw in post-industrial society in England were so much compounded by what he saw with slavery in America. So he really he got to the South and turned around and went back up towards New York and Boston and Canada at the time. But he was well received here. People liked him because he was just as famous here. But he did not get a good taste for this country. And in his next serial novel, The Life and Adventures of Martin Chuzzlewit, he also has some of the characters talk bad about their experiences in America. So no matter what, he always, puts his life into his work. Despite his success at this point, his trip to America, he had to borrow money from his publishers to take, I think it was like 6 months off and travel. So he borrowed about £2,000 in advance. And he had an expensive home that was about £3,000 plus more per year that he was renting in London, which would be, if it really existed, it would be around the corner from 222 Beaker Street, which would be the address of Sherlock Holmes. So he was right in a fairly fashionable area of London, and he was trying to present himself as a proper gentleman. So he had some of those attributes he didn't like in his dad, that kind of spendthrift attitude. He was making more money, but he was still spending it more. He always thought, it's coming in, so it wasn't a problem, but his success was down a little bit at this point. And his publishers had inserted a clause into the next book that they could withhold about £50 out of his £200 per issue if Martin Chuzzlewit wasn't selling well. They never actually enforced this, but they kept threatening with it, trying to, I guess, get him to write better in their minds, something the public would enjoy more. And it was in this cloud of problems where Dickens decided to publish another novel, a Christmas novel, separately from Martin Chuzzlewit, and that's where A Christmas Carol comes. And yes, I will keep saying Martin Chuzzlewit a lot because it's fun to say Chuzzlewit.
You say it's fun to say Chuzzlewit.
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 I like my Chuzzlewit out.
Oh, God.
Come on, that's a cheesesteak joke. That's a good joke.
Oh yeah, I was about to say that's a Pittsburgh line right there.
That's a cheesesteak joke.
I was going to say it's because you're witless.
Well,
Oh!
I mean, you're not off. Back to Dickens now.
With these problems and his fifth child on the way, Dickens first approached his publishers in October of 1843, who refused to back the book. They wanted him to focus on finishing Chuzzlewit, and also that they didn't think he could have it out by Christmas. They said, if they get it ready, they could do it for 1844, but he wanted it out now. In his mind, it's like, this is a quick £1,000 I can make, and that's something he was known to say to his friends. So what he did, he decided to publish the book himself, and he used Chapman and Hall as more of a distributor. He'd pay them for the printing fees, and then they'd get a bit of a royalty for it, but he was taking on the burden of getting everything done himself. This gave him 6 weeks to write, edit, prep, have the book illustrated in order to get it out in time for Christmas of 1843.
Wow.
And this is why he was still finishing writing Martin Chuzzlewit.
Good grief.
Yeah, there is
the NaNoWriMo that started it all.
There is a movie that just came out this last week based off a book. I recommend the book a little bit more than the movie. I think it's got a little more facts to it and a little more detail, but the movie was still very enjoyable, and it's The Man Who Invented Christmas, telling the story of how Dickens did this in 6 weeks and some of the backdrop. It's a little over-dramatized in the movie, but he was kind of a drama queen, it seems like. He's always wanted to be an actor, so he kind of hammed it up even in his personal life. But while Dickens had, these commercial and personal reasons for writing A Christmas Carol, it really exemplifies the social consciousness and responsibility, those ideals that have been the defining hallmark of Dickens's work since the very beginning, and would continue on way after. With the Old Curiosity Shop, I said it focused on the young Nell, sweet, cheerful, and she's trying to protect her grandfather, who was a spendthrift who gambled away some loaned money, trying to make their lives better. The grandfather wasn't presented in the best light, but the evil moneylender who makes it his personal vendetta to get the grandfather thrown in jail or thrown in a nut house because he scammed him, even after somebody offers to pay the debt. So the moneylender just, his avarice and his greed drives him to the grave in the end as well. And, Oliver Twist championed the orphans and the workhouse children, which Dickens still saw himself as one of, even though he was only there for that short period of time. But he didn't just leave it to his writing to champion, the poor and unrepresented classes that were very prevalent in Victorian England. Where he spent a lot of money to present himself as a proper gentleman, in an effort to hide that past he was ashamed of. He was also known to regularly give to beggars on the street, almost anything he could, and he was a key speaker at tons of charity events. Basically, he would just volunteer to be, they want to raising money for this or that. He was always one to go to that. Even he was told sometimes, like, you need to finish some of your books. He still took the time to make sure he went to these events. And it was during one of these events, raising money for a library and leisure facility for the working classes of Manchester, England, which was at the time a very, and still I think is, a very industrial town in the north of England. It's also this same place where, Marx and Engels got their ideas for what, became the Communist Manifesto that led to Lenin and the party, but it was the same observations that Dickens had, but Dickens, saw it differently. He didn't see it as, the people with the money are bad. He's like, the people with the money can do more. And I think that was because he saw his dad as a proper gentleman and saw himself that way, that he wanted to put the responsibility on people and not the government to do these things. But it was under these guys is that he penned what is possibly the greatest morality tale of English literature. Scrooge wasn't wrong for being rich. He was wrong for seeing wealth as a goal itself and not the happiness it can bring to him and those around him, and that he can still be redeemed. That's the difference between where Dickens went and Marx and Engels would go from the same story.
And that's why you should donate to Toys for Tots, folks.
And that is a great segue. I don't know if we've gotten any.
We have not.
Oh, we should, though.
Last one's still me. No, we had a lot of Scrooges out there who are going to be visited by 3 ghosts.
And get lumps of coal in their stockings.
The ghosts of podcasts past, present, and future.
Yeah. God, and then the ending will be screaming out, "They did it all in 50 hours!"
Going back to The Man Who Invented Christmas, for those of you who might be more interested in the movie, I thought it was a very enjoyable drama. It's obviously a dramatized event of the actual experience of authoring the book, and it does really show some elements of his personal life and how that obviously was influential in characters and creating the environment for the book and the storytelling. Again, in a dramatized way. You have to remember the book itself is actually a nonfiction, and what they create is a fiction. Well, it's not really a fiction, but what would you call it, Ron? Would it be like a docudrama, I guess, or something like to that effect? But it has Dan Stevens, who plays Charles Dickens, which we remember from the latest Beauty and the Beast. He was excellent in this movie. Christopher Plummer plays Scrooge, who's great, just excellent. So I would recommend the movie if anyone was wanting to go back and consider that.
Definitely. It's not quite in wide release. It wasn't at our local theater. We had to go a little further to see it. But it's definitely worth a view, particularly in the holiday season. And
yeah. If you are a fan of Saving Mr. Banks, just having that experience of understanding the author's process, then, again, this is a very similar kind of concept.
Sorry for that. I have to pop between windows here. So we all know the story of A Christmas Carol, right? Ebenezer Scrooge is an old moneylender with a dead partner, Jacob Marley. He's a complete miser, or as Dickens puts it in the book, a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner.
I think right there we really get the Dickensian model. He's just such a great picture painter with words. You get Scrooge in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 words,
We really do, and that's I think the beauty of Dickens is, the beauty of his words is so unique. At the time when we saw, the magazines are named, you know, Bob's Literature.
Yeah.
He puts in these, just long strings of adjectives, and he's known for inventing the word boredom. There's a lot of stuff where they say, you know, Shakespeare has the most entries in the Oxford English Dictionary. That's just because, everybody knew Shakespeare, so it was easy to say, oh, it's, 400 years old. That's good enough. But Dickens has a lot of entries of words he created as well. I mean, bah humbug.
Yeah.
True.
It's just so impressive to look at that one excerpt. There's no one word that describes Scrooge. You need every single one of these words, and you need them all together in order to be able to convey how much of a mess this character really is.
It's true, and he paints him just so well from that. And we're introduced to him in his counting house, in a way like he's so cheap he won't add a single lump of coal to the fire to warm up the office, particularly for his clerk, Bob Cratchit. He has his own fire that's a little warmer, but he doesn't really care as long as he gets the work done. And this is on Christmas Eve. His nephew Fred enters, who he quickly rebuffs. Fred's trying to get him to come to dinner. But this is, the whole first bah humbug. Christmas a humbug, Uncle? Storyline we see. And then, of course, we have this charity solicitors coming in with the famous, are there no workhouses? Are there no prisons? Better to let them die and decrease the surplus population. That's all here, and these are almost every version of the book, or of, that's done as a play, a movie is going to use those. And they're words that'll be thrown back in his face later on. At the end of this, Scrooge dismisses Bob Cratchit for the day, telling him he can take the day off, but he needs to be in all the earlier the next. Scrooge heads home. He scares off some carolers, trying to carol for, some handouts. But when he gets to his front door, he's frightened when his door knocker turns into the face of Jacob Marley. He dismisses it and heads into the house. It's large, not the best decorated, but it's still something you could tell Scrooge thinks of. This is what my house should be. I don't need it to be more than this, but people won't do business with me if it's any less than this. Even then, it's not well lit. His dinner's not, as elaborate as you'd expect for someone who's supposed to be so wealthy and all that. After dinner, he hears the noises, and the ghost of Marley appears, bound and weighted down by chains, and different things, are lock boxes or piggy banks or whatever in the different versions, but it's all the same imagery. Scrooge is warned that these chains were forged in life by all of his misdeeds, by being mean and miserly, and that Scrooge's chains would be longer and heavier if he does not change his ways. He has a chance, and he will be visited by 3 spirits that night. Scrooge protests, doesn't believe Marley is real, but he's still afraid. There's a whole other specters are shown to him that are also in chains. That's something you don't see in a lot of versions. But there we see the original illustration of Marley's ghost, and then we see the original illustration. There were 4 color, 4 just kind of etching illustrations like this in the original work. But these are the other spirits, which you don't see most of the time.
If you go back one, you can... The chains there are a lot less pronounced than they are in a lot of other versions of this.
Well, just remember, he had to give an outline to his illustrator, because these had to be done in that same 6-week period while he's still writing the book. And that's one of the things we see in... I think was one of the better scenes in the illustrator is I think John Leach. Yes, he was a famous illustrator at the time that Dickens has wanted to work with in the past, but he hadn't been able to, so he used him for this. But it was such a tight deadline that Dickens was changing his mind on what things wanted to be, but it gets the message of who Marley and Scrooge are very well in that.
Oh, definitely.
And this is a scene that's in some versions. I think it's in the 2009 Zemeckis, but you don't see it in any of the really famous versions. So Scrooge is later woken he got woke, as we learned last night.
Oh gosh, no.
He's woken later at the stroke of one by the ghost of Christmas past. In the original, it's described as both a child and an old man, almost kind of fading between them. The ghost flies out the window, much to Scrooge's protest. He's dragged along, promised he'll be fine. The first thing they visit is young Scrooge at school. We see him kind of off on his own, but he is excited at one point to be taken home by his older sister. This is Fred's mom. We see him begin to thaw a bit when he's seeing some of these things. And he actually even says at this point, he's like, I maybe should have given something to that caroler I saw last night. So Scrooge's transformation starts really early in this. The next scene we're off to is old Fezziwig's shop, where Scrooge apprenticed as a young man, and he gets swept up in the Christmas party, meeting Isabel, or Belle, his love interest as a child. Where is... I don't know what happened to Fezziwig. I had a Fezziwig illustration too, from the original. I don't know what happened to it. I tried to put these in order.
If we get to it again, we'll bring it back up.
Yeah, let me see if I have it here. I'm just... No, it didn't get saved. Oh well. Sorry about that. We are going to re-edit this and put it up with more of the kind of video you're used to if you're watching these. So there'll be some clips and a lot more of these things, as well as some, graphics, giving some more details, and sometimes what I think are funny photoshops, but not always so to everybody else. So, he gets swept up in the Fezziwig Christmas party, but then they go a little forward. We're seeing Belle dump him because he replaced her love with the love of money. He says he wants to, it's for their own good. He's trying to, build a fortune before they wed, but she just has enough of it and she's off. There is one more stop in the original version where we see at some point between him being dumped and the present day, we see her by a fire with her kids and her husband. Her husband mentions that he's seen Scrooge and describes him as a miserable person. Scrooge can't take any more at this point, and he tries to extinguish the fire that burns at the top of the ghost's head. This is the only illustration that we see that features the ghost of Christmas past, which is why, if you look at all the different versions in film and stuff, it's the one that changes the most. There's no definitive what that ghost is supposed to look like. All we get is, at one point it shows all the faces of all the people Scrooge has seen in this vision, and that's why Scrooge is trying to extinguish them. In the Zemeckis version, you actually see this happen, and then Scrooge flies out the window, but here he just wakes up in his own house the next day, or what he thinks is the next day, because the clock strikes one yet again, and Scrooge is woken by the ghost of Christmas present. A large, jolly man sitting on a throne made out of a Christmas feast. He's in a green fur-lined robe with a big red bushy beard. Looks kind of like the Greek god version of Santa.
Yeah, that's like Santa Zeus.
Right. Excuse me for just a second here.
Is that one of the original drawings that went with A Christmas Carol?
Yeah, these are all the original etchings, and
That's amazing.
Yeah.
that's why I said, like, we see all these things that we know and are familiar with, but that Ghost of Christmas Past, that's that where he's being extinguished. He's not in the image, but that's the only time we see it. So, we'll get to what they look like in different versions of
Yeah.
Almost a bit of a take on Bacchus there, huh?
Yep, very much so. Very much the celebration, and he talks about his 1,842 brothers that have come before him. We we see him in just he is here for the moment, and that's exactly what that's the present.
The physical.
I think it's really no. Go ahead.
The physical embodiment of YOLO.
Oh gosh, I think it's really impressive how little his figure changes throughout all the different representations we've had. Like that, you look at that picture and you immediately know, regardless of which versions you've seen. Oh, that's Christmas Present right there. It's so consistent because it really is just a good character design for that. You don't need to tweak it. Like it works.
And
the only thing is that that fur vest does not seem like it's going to keep your chest warm like at all. That's a little exposed.
No, it's beginning to look like Ricardo Montalban in Wrath of Khan.
Oh man, that was an amazing reference.
So when instead of flying out the window, they walk through the streets of London and they see, people just celebrating Christmas, whether it be to church or just caroling in the streets. You just see all of this. First, they're taken to Cratchit's house, where Scrooge is taken aback by the family and how poor they are, but how happy they are. Nothing seems to get them down. But he's really moved when the youngest child comes in, Tiny Tim, and Tiny Tim is just optimism wrapped in rags and given a crutch. Where he's described as, coming from a church, and he likes people to see him as a cripple because it reminds all the people of the good Jesus did healing the sick. That's Tiny Tim's level of optimism. He's like,
wow.
Oh, it's good for this because it makes other people feel better. And here, Scrooge really, you see the first solid change where he really shows outright concern for Tiny Tim. Like, it saddens him, and he asks, what will happen to him? And the Ghost of the Future says, well, if these shadows remain unchanged, he sees an empty chair and a crutch by a fire. And at that point, Bob Cratchit goes to toast Scrooge as the founder of the feast. Even though it's a meager feast, he's still thankful for his job and thankful for the little bit of, I think, 15 shillings a week he gets, which is the equivalent of 40 pounds a year, which was, what Dickens' dad went to jail for.
Yeah.
Cratchit's wife, starts to say a mean thing about Scrooge. Is like, oh, he's not worth toasting in this house. And Cratchit says, no, he is. He's still this. And she relents and says, I'll toast for your benefit, not for his.
I think Miss Piggy's Mrs. Cratchit's speech is really the best version of that speech.
It's a lot of the exact wording.
Exactly. Same words from the literature.
We are then taken. This is a scene I don't think I've ever seen in any version, where we see a miners' camp very quickly, and we see that even these people who work hard and have almost nothing still celebrate Christmas in some way. And then we're off to Scrooge's nephew Fred's place, where we see him partying with his friends, and they're making fun of Scrooge, even to the point where they're playing like a charades kind of game. I don't know what it is, where he's describing him as a unwanted animal that lives in London, and they finally guess, oh, it's your uncle, and they're all laughing. Oh, hell yes, nobody wants him around. He's all miserable on his own. And Scrooge is upset by that. The
I always
ghost
took that as kind of like a 20 questions variant.
Yeah,
they were
something
trying
like
to
that.
do. Yeah.
The ghost of Christmas present begins to fade away because he will die at the stroke of midnight when Christmas goes away. But as he's beginning to die, Scrooge notices a claw peeking out from under the robes of the spirit. The spirit opens the robes and presents to Scrooge two feral children. They are described as want and ignorance, and they are not the spirit's children. They are the children of man, and it's man's fault that these children exist in these, dying forms. And Scrooge asks, "Why are they like this?" And here is where there no prisons, no workhouses, is thrown right back into his face. And at this point, the spirit disappears, instantly to be replaced by a cloaked and hooded phantom. Another version that's never changed in any of the versions. And it's the thing, I don't quite know if this is where we get the image of the Reaper or this was taken from the image of the Reaper.
Oh, like a chicken before the egg. We're not quite sure which one came first.
I mean, it's very clear to us that this is supposed to symbolize that, but do we get that because this is, we said in our Pinocchio episode, Pinocchio is considered the second most read book beyond the Bible, but I've also seen this referenced as that. And I believe it more for this. Because everybody knows this story by heart in Western culture.
Looking very briefly, it looks like there's a book called Godfather Death that came out in around 1812 that has this kind of imagery of the personification of death. And if I remember my times correctly, that does predate this slightly.
Yes.
It's about 30 years beforehand, yeah. So
Yes.
Yeah.
Tom Dickens was born. So
that's that. There you go. So this is kind of a new concept, but if you're an author who's well read, you probably tripped across this at some point in time. It was originally German, so that might have made it a little difficult for English to find it at that point in time. So it could just be two separate inventions of the same idea, but the idea did exist in some form a little bit before then.
And that makes some sense that if it was German and coming to England at this time, this is something I'm going to mention in a little bit, but, this is German influence is big in England because this is where Queen Victoria married Prince Albert, a German, and brought a lot of traditions over that became popularized. So who knows if that's where this came from, but that could have been it. I realized I didn't have this up, but this is Want and Ignorance in the original illustration.
That sequence with Want and Ignorance is featured in the Robert Zemeckis Christmas Carol movie. It's the only Christmas Carol movie that I've watched that has that sequence that is just ridiculously terrifying.
Yeah. And it's a point that doesn't need to be it's a very weird point to make. This thing. And there's something I read about, if you look at this image, this is clearly the way the smoke stacks are there. This isn't London. This is Manchester he's seeing here to represent these children and the workhouses.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it's want and ignorance, but also a play on the words want and ignorance?
Oh,
I'm not sure on that, but
and on the image that you have up right now, I know this is going to sound weird, but doesn't Scrooge look a bit Monty Burns-esque right there?
Well, that might be, the design of Burns.
Oh, absolutely. But I look and I just saw it. I just that's Mr. Burns.
I don't think anybody's going to argue that there's a lot of literature more influential than this story.
Yeah.
I mean, the word Scrooge, it was used in a similar sense before, but it was not in common parlance. I think Dickens is credited with making it that kind of everyday word.
Yeah. Doubling back very briefly, Godfather Death, that was actually one of the Brothers Grimm fairy tales. So I'm sure that got translated relatively quickly. So that this probably wasn't
folklore.
Yeah, a lot of the images of the Grim Reaper also come from folklore from Norse mythology as well as Greek mythology.
So clearly, this is to symbolize death, even though there's more than just death shown. We're very familiar with him seeing the grave, but when the Phantom appears, Scrooge recognizes him as the ghost of Christmas yet to come, where he's taken to overhear some merchants discussing a dead businessman. They're very indifferent to his death. Some seem to take joy and revel in it, not saying, "Oh, good, he's dead," but like joking about it, kind of thing, with someone they just didn't care about. No one wants, people are more interested in where his money's going to go than who he died. They don't care to go to his funeral unless lunch is served. They joke. He's also taken to see someone who's later revealed to be his housekeeper, who's selling a bunch of his material. Kind of happy that he's died, that she could start. She feels she's owed wages, so she's selling his old bed linens and things like that. He's actually, at some point, asks if anyone feels bad about his death, and we're taken to a scene where we see a man talking to his wife. The wife says, "Oh, did you get a chance to ask him to forgive our debt or extend our loan?" And he says, "No, he died. I'm sorry, I didn't get a chance to ask him." And then that quickly turns around and says, "But you know what? His debt's going to have to be, someone's going to have to buy the debt. And it's not going to be anyone as bad as him, so we're still in a better shape because he's dead." We do go to see the Cratchits in the future, and we see Tiny Tim has died, and all the joy in that family is sucked out. They still are a close family, but I mean, it's just a heartbreaking scene. From how joyous they were to just absolute mourning. Scrooge is taken to the graveyard, where we famous scene of whose grave is that? He points, it's wiped away, he sees his own name. Scrooge asks if these are things that will happen or things that may happen. He gets no answer because the ghost of Christmas future never speaks. He tries to grab the hand of the ghost to shake some sense, like what's going to happen. But he wakes up and he's only clutching his own bedpost. Back in his room, Scrooge runs to the window and asks the passing boy, "What day is it?" He's told it's Christmas, and then realizes, "Oh, the ghosts have worked their magic overnight. I haven't missed it." He sends the boy off to buy the priced turkey in the butcher's window. The butcher brings it by. Scrooge sends him over to the Cratchit's house via a cab because it's too far to walk. Scrooge wanders the streets greeting people and runs into the charity solicitor from the day before, who he whispers an unknown amount into his ear. And the man is shocked and told to come collect the money the next day. Scrooge goes to visit Fred and his nephew, where he has dinner and celebrates with them. He never goes to the Cratchits in this. He sees Bob the next morning. And you kind of see Scrooge is a nice guy, but he still can't help but, being a little mean to his clerk, even if it's joking. When Cratchit comes in, he's like, he gives him the whole, "You're late. We need to have a talk. I'm going to have to raise your salary." kind of thing.
More money.
Ebenezer Scrooge, the first Ashton Kutcher.
And he promises to help his family and take care of the mortgage. We're told Scrooge is not only good to his word, he's better to his word. He's becomes one of the best men of London. And we are told very clearly, and it is in capital letters, that Tiny Tim does not die. I think this is because people are so mad about Little Nell.
Yeah. Oh, gosh.
I won't kill the boy this time.
Yeah. I could just hear the salt in that line. It's like, "No, I didn't kill him this time. Calm down. Don't write your angry letters."
And that's a thing in Man Who Invented Christmas, where he reads a thing and, he's having someone proofread a copy, and they're like, "But you can't kill Tiny Tim. You already killed Nell."
Oh,
Actually, Rob,
gosh.
did we figure out if that was accurate? I think you said you read the book, and there was a little bit of a discrepancy as to whether he had actually ever truly considered killing Tiny Tim off or not, or whether it was originally going to be that he would survive anyway.
From what I read in the book, it seems like he had his idea for the script or for the book pretty solid. It just took him the time to write it and get it done. The movie is more of the process of him writing, like he's imagining the characters and letting them act out the play in his head. But I think he pretty much had the morality tale exactly the way he wanted it to start. So it's a good dramatization of that, and it is probably some things that people around him were saying as he was pitching the book to his friends, his lawyers, his publishers, all those people he would talk to as he was doing this.
And so people were probably like, "Oh, and so Tiny Tim's gonna live?" Like maybe even before he'd actually written it. Oh yeah, sure. Like maybe, yeah, he's gonna live.
Yeah. It was a very elaborately produced book when it came out on December 19th of 1843. He had to, he was very clear. It's like this red cover with gold print and gold gilded edges on the pages. It was a very expensive book for that, and he was only charging 5 shillings a copy. And at that price, all 5,000 copies sold out in 4 days.
It's better than Harry Potter.
Gosh. Yeah, here you go.
Two more.
Before we get too much into here, though, I've one thing that I've always kind of thrown me about the ending of this story is so we send the boy off to go buy the prize turkey in the window. 2 things. One, I feel really bad for the butcher that it's now Christmas Day and the prize turkey still hasn't been sold. That's real rough, dude. You got a real lucky break, but you almost had a very bad time there. Number 2, the butcher's open and sells the turkey on Christmas.
Well, we're gonna discuss the history of Christmas a little bit in a minute. So that
okay, if that comes up later,
that.
Then sure, keep going.
Yeah, and like in certain versions, he sends the kid to go get the turkey and bring it back. He never but this in the real version, he has the butcher do it. So it's not like he sends some 30-pound kid to go grab a 30-pound turkey. Because it is described as being as big as Tiny Tim. So the book sold out its first print in the 4 days, and then sold 2 more prints out by mid-January. But as successful as it was not the financial success Dickens had hoped. Due to his elaborate printing demands and the fees taken by, he did not understand how much it cost to print a book. He made £140 from this initial run. It was good, it was extra money, but it wasn't that £1,000 he was hoping to completely get him out of debt. And this is why he started going after those unlicensed ripoffs that came out instantly. At the time, people were still doing these versions, with little changes, and I mean very little changes from what I understand to avoid the copyright, which the laws did exist. They come into effect a lot stronger in later Victorian times. So it's about 40 years before we kind of get strong copyright stuff. But now that he's the owner of the book outright and not being paid, a fee for it, he decides to fight. He wins in court against one of these unlicensed ripoffs, which I think were called rewritings or reimaginings, like a kind of word Disney would use.
Oh, gosh. It's a soft reboot.
He wins in court, but he's only left with a legal bill because the people he wins against just are bankrupt. So he not only has to pay his legal fees, he has to pay theirs.
What?
That's the way the court system works back then, yeah.
Wow.
And even still today, in America, where you kind of pay your own lawyer whether you win or lose, in some countries, the winner always gets their legal fees paid. But in this case, the winner had to pay the legal fees anyway because nobody else was going to pay them. There were license plays here and things like that. But it once again, it made him from being a writer on the decline to this is the defining writer of the age, and it made him even more famous. His novels begin to skyrocket in sales. I mean, we see beyond that 100,000 in some of the books that come out after. And he also does 4 more Christmas novels, all on the same theme with some sort of supernatural interference, saying like even like a Wonderful Life type stories, like, oh, if you died, this is what would happen. So it's all the same theme, but never at the same level as A Christmas Carol was. Anybody have anything to say about the original book?
I'm surprised when we learn about Dickens, I always feel like we learn about the Tale of Two Cities, and this seems to be what was more the success story, what really made him who he was.
Yeah, I'll be honest. This is the first thing I think of when I hear about Dickens is this story. It's just a classic.
Oh, Tale of Two Cities and Great Expectations are actually, I think, 2 of his last 3 works. They were more famous and sold better, probably, but they're at the end of his writing career. And Tale of Two Cities is my favorite Dickens book, and I think it's one of the few books where it has one of the most famous opening lines and one of the most famous closing lines of all time. So does Christmas Carols. You know, Marley was dead to begin with, and God bless us, everyone.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, this is really that kind of, where he just goes from being a well-known author to being the author of the age. Obviously, this has an impact on the pop culture and, so many versions, which we'll talk about a bunch of them. But the novel changed Christmas itself and how it was celebrated, particularly in the English-speaking world. I'm not going to talk about the nativity or any of the, birth of Jesus aspects of the holiday. I'm going to discuss the social and cultural history. For the first few centuries of Christianity, Christmas wasn't even celebrated. It was somewhere around 200 AD where they decided, hey, let's figure out when Jesus was born. And there were dates all over the calendar, most of them in the spring, some of them in late summer. But it was set around 336 AD in Rome by the Pope, who was trying to get more converts from the Roman pagan world. So he put it on December 25th around the winter solstice to kind of take, hey, look, we have this big celebration too. So if you join our religion, you're not going to miss out on the, party that's going to be Saturnalia. We're going to have that party too. So that's kind of how that date got fixed in history.
Yeah, a lot of that was trying to blur the two together to the point where they could kind of point at some of the pagan traditions to be like, yeah, that's Christmas. Yeah, that tree thing. Yeah, that's us. Yeah, and they kind of just abducted it, and that's how we've got a lot of the things that we have now.
And it was a very raucous holiday. It was about the feast festival kind of thing you would associate with like a Roman. Saturn is, I think, the god of the harvest and grain. So, in the winter when they're finishing the harvest, that's kind of the same feel you get for Christmas. It wasn't very solemn. It was more about revelry. It was still a minor holiday on the calendar, too. I mean, over time, Easter was always the number one. And even the Epiphany, which is when the Magi visit, was a major holiday, even more so than Christmas for years and years. But it kind of became that major holiday in 800-ish AD when Charlemagne picked that date when he was coronated. Is that the right word?
Yeah.
When he was crowned,
I think so.
Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. So, yeah, he picked that day specifically, and that made it more of a holiday. However, particularly in the English-speaking world, the Puritanical movement and the English Civil War left the festival outlawed because it was associated with these big parties. Left it outlawed in England and even parts of the United States. Here in Massachusetts, it was illegal for a while because of the Puritans. It was restored to being a holiday in about 1660 in England, the ban in America didn't last too long either. But it was still a minor thing, and the revelry had died down quite a bit by that point. By the time Dickens was alive, it was back to being both on the rise as both a legal holiday and a minor feast day, where families did gather to eat a roast goose and all that. The Christmas tree was just coming to England, thanks to Queen Victoria marrying Prince Albert. The Tenenbaum had been a tradition there for a while. So Christmas was celebrated, different places and different ways around the world. We're talking kind of the American English culture, which is kind of went everywhere since, pop culture kind of gets exported from those countries to non-English speakers more than the other way around. But the kind of charity that Dickens championed here in A Christmas Carol, it wasn't entirely unknown, but it wasn't as common as he made it sound. It was a developing concept. So the most direct influence Dickens had was on his choice of having Scrooge send a turkey instead of a traditional goose. People stopped buying goose for Christmas and started buying turkey because of this book. But
wow.
That and the way he has families celebrate with these big feasts and all, and the giving of gifts and the focus on charity as an act of giving as well, is kind of how he got dubbed the man who invented Christmas.
Is there a reason that Dickens had him send a turkey instead of a goose? Like, was there some symbolism there? Like that this is like a bigger symbol of wealth or something like that?
I think they are more expensive. They tend to be bigger animals in general.
Fair.
And the prize, like, if you, in the book, they're eating a goose at the Cratchits, but when he sends the boy to get the goose, he's like, no, not that goose. I want the prize turkey, the one that's bigger than Tiny Tim. So, yeah, it was basically like, this is a more celebratory thing. It's a bigger thing. Probably something that, wasn't eaten as regularly as it is now, obviously. There was no, lunch meat turkey.
No turkey club?
Nope.
Well, I bet they did for the week after. I'm sure they still had leftovers.
So there were play versions of A Christmas Carol that started almost instantly, and Dickens continued to do readings of A Christmas Carol until the day he died. This made him some money doing these readings, because he would just, especially around the holiday season, he would come up and in front of a crowd, you'd buy tickets, he'd just read the book, because it's a fairly short book. I think even like on the Kindle version was only like 90 pages. You could find it online very easily. Just Google it. The Gutenberg Project has a free copy where you have all these original images, which is where I got them from. Obviously, it's out of copyright, so you could find a way to get this book cheap to read it. And even Dickens' descendants still today, who are almost all named Charles, like Charles Dickens the 19th kind of thing.
Oh, wow.
Still go around and do readings all across the country and the world every Christmas, and a lot of them still make their money that way.
I'll bet that's a very profitable name to have.
Yeah, I mean, his first son was Charles. I believe his grandson was Charles, and Fred were names that cycled a lot through between he and his brothers and his kids, and then they just kept going from there. But even if the second born is not Charles, I think they always name him like the middle name Charles, so they could do it as well. There are so many versions on film, obviously. Even when film was just starting in 1901, it was one of the first features. Wikipedia has a list of 45 theatrically released versions of A Christmas Carol in English.
Wow.
There's Looney Tunes versions, Flintstones, Mr. Magoo. But we're here to talk about Mickey's Christmas Carol and the other Disney versions, so we're going to kind of keep it to that. I love Scrooge. I haven't watched it in a long time, but that's not one of the ones we're going to focus on, or any of the other earlier versions. If anybody has any comments on any of them, welcome to have them now.
I did find a connection between the Flintstones version and this.
Okay.
Hal Smith, who plays Goofy Cratchit, also plays Santa Claus in one of the Flintstone Christmas specials.
Wow.
Huh.
Yep. He also plays Santa Claus in Brady Christmas special.
I assume you mean the bunch and not Tom.
Oh gosh.
I'm not sure if he's eating avocado ice cream with TB12 or not, but I'm pretty sure I meant the television show.
Oh gosh. Need to deflate that idea pretty quick.
Yeah, it'll eventually happen, I'm sure.
Yeah, the Mr. Magoo version of the Christmas Carol came out before most of the any other animated, one of the earlier animated versions of A Christmas Carol.
Yeah, he is an older character too, so that makes sense.
Yeah.
So Mickey's Christmas Carol itself is a direct adaptation of a 1974 Disneyland Records, which was entitled An Adaptation of Charles Dickens' Christmas Carol. The majority of the characters that we see in the animated movie are played by the same people that we see in this version. There's a few changes. In the original record, the charity solicitors were Gideon and Foulfellow from Pinocchio. And the ghost of Christmas Past was Merlin. And the ghost of Christmas Future was the witch from Snow White, the hag version.
Yeah.
This is something that I think is missing from Disney today. This idea of our characters that we know and love going out there and playing characters, especially when they fit the archetype. Like, man, Mickey Mouse as Bob Cratchit just works so well. But I think that's really cool. I think that's something we miss. I love it when the Muppets do it.
And they say that.
The Muppets version's amazing.
They say how
yes, it is.
perfect Mickey is for it because he's always the nice guy and always underspoken.
Yeah.
Even if someone's dumping on him, he's still going to be the nice guy to him. And yeah, that fits so well. I used to think Scrooge was originally created for this. I didn't realize he dated all the way back to 1947.
Right. I mean, he was in those Donald Duck comic books.
Yeah, originally.
I was just about to say that.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about Scrooge. Originally, his first real appearance as Scrooge was in a comic book entitled Christmas on Bear Mountain. There was another character that was in a 1943 Donald short in the background that he was kind of based off of, but this is where we get Scrooge and his name. And it's very much in this archetype. He's a wealthy man, kind of humbugging Christmas. He was an old man with a beard, but in his next few appearances, he got younger and a bit more robust. And he stuck to the comics mostly. He had one cameo on the Mickey Mouse Club at a certain point, but he really didn't have a speaking role on film until 1967 with Scrooge McDuck and Money, and it was a animated entertainment edutainment short where Scrooge is teaching the kids, Huey, Dewey, and Louie, how to invest and grow their money, and it's very much like the, teaching kids not to be spendthrifts. But he does take their money and charges them a fee for his services at the end.
So Scrooge McDuck.
Yeah, here he was the only time he's appeared and voiced by Bill Thompson. But he's appeared in tons of comic books at the time, and all of his defining characteristics we later see in like DuckTales are in these comic books. He would be swimming in the money bin, and they even had his number one dime. But one of the things is he bounced between being the antagonist and the protagonist. Is kind of the stories dictate. Like if it was a Donald or a Huey, Dewey, Louie story, Scrooge could be the bad guy. He was the bad guy when they were the Junior Woodchucks at some points. But other times he would be the good guy. But he was always Scrooge. He's somewhere in between, always being the good guy and the bad guy. Well, you read a little bit more about all these comics, and you had some stuff to talk about, right?
Just a little bit. And mostly just about Carl Barks, who created Scrooge McDuck. He created Donald Duck and Scrooge McDuck kind of from his own personal experiences, obviously very similarly to the way that Charles Dickens was inspired by his personal life. But started life as a farmer, working as a farmhand for several years, kind of going from job to job. Frustration with that, I think that reminds us of a certain duck, namely Donald Duck. And he was oftentimes encountering, and this is, by the way, like, this is the time period we're talking about. So this is a time when he was meeting a lot of men who were struggling and dealing with, looking, getting by, looking for jobs, getting money for their families. There was a lot of eccentricity and stubbornness involved with dealing with these types of people, trying to, there's a lot of satirical issues there. So all of these things really kind of came together to kind of create what Scrooge McDuck really became, which was that kind of sense of stubbornness and that sense of pride about where his money's coming from and how he's spending his money. So all of that I thought was really interesting about his personal life, really coming into his characters. That's kind of the gist of really what I had to talk about. He was involved also in the creation of Huey, Dewey, and Louie, and in the comic books as well.
Yeah, Scrooge was really a big comic book character, and the new DuckTales kind of mimics that old art style. That's kind of how I learned he wasn't created for this, because this is his first major time he appears in anything but the educational short. Also, I didn't know sheep was a Scottish stereotype when I was a kid.
Oh, you didn't know that there was a difference? Yeah.
I didn't know that. That's why he was Scrooge McDuck. I had no idea until I was probably around 14 or 15. Someone told me, no, that's a stereotype.
Some of the other interesting things about Carl Barks are information about how he was inspirational to Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, in that there was an episode, or not an episode, but I guess one of the comics, The Seven Cities of Cibola, was cause for inspiration for Raiders of the Lost Ark, and that's where they have the boulder scene that evidently happens in that book. And then let's see. Oh, there were also a number of stories about space travel. Credits to Barks and the storytelling of the comic books to help them in terms of their cinematic inspiration.
All right, I do want to actually reach out and thank some people. We've had a few donations.
Oh, sweet.
Do you have
you want music?
Yeah, if you can.
I got it.
Jesse D, thank you, $50. Brent D, thank you, $50. Lizzie Meeks, thank you, $10. We appreciate all of it. And guys, we're doing this show. Some of us have gotten very little sleep over the past couple of days because we're doing a 50-hour marathon from all around WDWNT. We're raising money for Toys for Tots through our CrowdRise page. You can find it at toys.wdwnt.com, wdwntunes.com. We're a live feed with video and audio for the show. So far, we've raised a total of $3,164, but we still have a long way to go before 10 o'clock tonight to get to that $7,000 goal. We don't see a penny of this. This goes straight to Toys for Tots. They're a great charity to, give underprivileged children something for the holidays, and that's why I chose A Christmas Carol for this episode, because it is that spirit of giving we're trying to tap into here. Thanking Charles Dickens for creating that spirit that we're celebrating with this marathon. So if you can donate, please do. If you have donated or you can't, go ahead and we have our posts on Facebook and on Twitter. Go ahead and share those with your followers. Share them all over social media. This isn't for us. This is for kids who need something this Christmas. And
kids like Tiny Tim. You guys don't want Tiny Tim to not have any presents.
I will just put up a picture of that empty crutch by the fire. And cry.
Oh no!
Make me do that.
That tears you. Oh man,
I've watched so many versions of this. Every time I can't help
every
but tear up.
time. Even this one, you're like, these are cartoon characters, but still, they need a minute.
Yeah.
All right, so we don't have a lot of time left, so we're gonna, we have to get into Mickey's Christmas Carol a little further. So it was originally released in 1983, based on that '74 album. Yeah, the story is a basic version of Dickens' classic. It's really condensed. A lot of stuff's taken out, but a lot of the lines are there. Scrooge is obviously played by Scrooge McDuck, who was originally named after, the Dickens character. Here he was voiced by Alan Young, who wrote and did the voice in that 1974 album. He wasn't being considered for the role in the movie. Somebody actually asked him if he could be a dialogue coach on a Scottish accent, because Young is originally from Edinburgh, but he learned to speak with an American accent as an adult, so he could go back to his Scots accent really easily. But when he found out what the guy was auditioning for, he called up and said, "Wait a minute, this is my script, guys. Can I just have the role?" And they gave it to him.
That's awesome.
Mickey is Bob Cratchit, and Donald is Scrooge's nephew, Fred, quite appropriately. The visiting solicitors are Mole and Rat from The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad.
Which I found out through this, my wife has never seen. So I'm definitely going to be checking that out soon with her.
Mm-hmm.
That's coming up. It's not going to be too long of a thing. We try and do these monthly shows. Fantasia is in the works. It's a long show. It takes a lot of editing to do these. We're not showing as many graphics as we can because I can't. I have a few more pictures. I just don't. I can't look at the script control and do all these things at once. But we do edit in clips from the movie so you can see what we're talking about. We're talking about different things, different historical people, all these things. If you watch our YouTube shows, and I'm going to do one for this, that's heavily edited, you get a lot more of the visual history as well. So please check those out. Fantasia is coming out soon.
And speaking of the visual history, Ron and Laurel, how did you guys rewatch this?
On DVD. Do you mean? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, totally.
Okay, so we have the Blu-ray of Mickey's Christmas Carol, and so we watched that. We also watched it on 3 or 4 other DVDs that we found that it also has the short available on it. So that was on DVD. The Blu-ray looks amazing. I think.
Seriously, that's what I was getting to. Yeah.
Yeah. The Blu-ray looks really good.
Copy that came with our DVD copy, so we do have the iTunes digital.
I purchased it through I don't remember if it was iTunes or Amazon, but the digital copy is just so sharp, really great looking.
Yeah, I'm going to go to how many different weird releases this thing had in a minute, but let's just go through all the characters who appear. Mole and Rat are from Mr. Toad. Goofy is the role of Marley. Jiminy replaces Merlin as the Ghost of Christmas Past. And at this point, it's a funnier version of the original story, but it's when we get to the Ghost of Christmas Past, things begin to get really condensed. We only see the Fezziwig scene in the past. And a lot in different adaptations, they take different things he's shown because there's so much. It can't quite fit into that 90-minute movie, or in this case, a 24-minute movie without it. So Fezziwig is Mr. Toad, and Isabelle is Daisy. That scene ends pretty quickly, and we're gone to Ghost of Christmas Future, who's Willie the Giant from Mickey and the Beanstalk. They even lift some of the jokes directly from Mickey and the Beanstalk. He's Christmas present and shows only the Cratchit's house. Quickly fades to Pete as the Ghost of Christmas Future, who all we see is a tombstone scene. Scrooge wakes up, sends the boy for the turkey. He meets Fred on the street, never goes to his house. And here, instead of Cratchit coming to work the next day, he goes to Cratchit's house with the same kind of goofiness, that kind of pranking he does. But that's the end of that. There's a lot more cameos. The Big Bad Wolf and the 3 Little Pigs are seen on the street in the opening scene. Huey, Dewey, and Louie all are at Fezziwig's party with Chip and Dale. Others at the party that are more smaller known characters: Grandma Duck, Horse Collar, Clara Cluck, Toby Tortoise, Max Hare, Gus Goose, Peter Pig, Patty Pig, Clarabelle Cow, Angus McBadger, the Secretary Bird from Bedknobs and Broomsticks, Lady Cluck, Sis and Tag-On from Robin Hood. So all the characters at the party are taken from someone Disney fans should recognize. The Cratchits are Minnie, and the nephews and nieces take the place of the Cratchits kids. And then you see other random characters like the Wind and the Willows weasels are the Gravediggers, and the horse from that, Cyril Proudbottom, is Fred's horse. And then there's just random characters from Robin Hood: Skippy, Toby, Otto, Mother Rabbit, and they're on some of the crowd scenes. So yeah, the story is very close, but it's just really condensed. There's not that much to talk about. It's hard to find the history of the animation in this. It was done. It's one of the only features that Lasseter is credited on, and he won't be credited on too many in the future, probably. At this point.
When you started writing this, that probably was like, oh hey, look, John Lasseter is credited in this, and now it's like, oh hey, look, Lasseter.
Yeah, this is a really bad time for Disney animation. This is about, I think, between like Fox and the Hound and Black Cauldron era, so not the best time. This is when Don Bluth has just left, taken a lot of the animators with him. But the guy who animated Mickey was one of his first major things. He was a young kid. I forgot his name. Laurel, you have that handy, right?
What?
I forgot who animated Mickey, but he was a new animator.
Oh, I don't have that. We talked about it, didn't we?
I have some of the voices. This is Alan Young's first cartoon version of Scrooge, but he would go on to do DuckTales, and this very clearly spawns Scrooge as a character in DuckTales. I don't think that would have happened if it wasn't for this. This is Wayne Allwine's first appearance as Mickey. And it's also Mickey's first theatrical role in 30 years. But sadly, it's the opposite end for the voice of Donald with Clarence Nash. It was his last role.
But I felt, and I had to look back, and I have Clarence Nash's biography here on IMDb. I was like, that doesn't sound like the Donald I know. But I mean, Clarence Nash was Donald in all those shorts. I mean, he was Donald forever. And yeah, the last time he performs as Donald.
Yeah, I think the voice just evolved. He's a lot clearer here than he was in the younger days.
The chat says, was it Glenn Keane as the animator for Mickey?
Oh, that's right. We just talked about this last night amongst the millions of things I watched in preparation for this show. Yeah, so he's featured in the behind-the-scenes bonus, which is actually one of the few things that was only available on like the VHS. It's hard to find that bonus 30-minute little featurette about making of the movie, but Glenn talks about making Mickey.
You could find it on YouTube. It's a good little quick thing, and it's very much that 80s style. Looks like a Disney Channel special, kind of thing. Let's see, where were we? Was nominated for Best Animated Short Subject. It did not win. It came out theatrically. It came out first in England, attached to, I believe, a re-release of The Jungle Book in October, and came out December of '83, that same year, as attached to The Rescuers in the U.S. So it was a short thrown in to get people to go to those re-releases that they were doing at the time.
It kind of sounds like something they still do.
Yeah.
Yep. There's been immediately after in '84, it started appearing on TV on NBC. It has appeared on TV every year since then on networks such as NBC, CBS, ABC, the Disney Channel, Toon Disney, ABC Family, and all of its successors. It's had numerous home video and DVD versions. It was released on VHS as just Mickey's Christmas Carol. It was released as Walt Disney Mini Classics, Mickey's Christmas Carol. Disney's Favorite Stories, Mickey's Christmas Carol. Mickey's Magical Christmas, Snowden at the House of Mouse. It's one of the segments in there. Those are all the VHS releases alone. It had a Betamax release as well.
Oof.
It had a CED release.
A what?
A CED.
It's
like a giant compact disc. It's like an in between a CD and like a laser disc.
Think about
Wow.
Think about think about a record, inside like a 3-inch floppy disk. So
Yeah.
A capacitance electronic disc.
yeah, it was an
Floppy
analog.
disk of a movie.
Oh goodness!
It was an analog
wow.
media that took like magnetic discs. Like it was a magnetic record inside a case that looked like a floppy disk.
Wow.
I only found out these things existed earlier this year when we found one at like a consignment shop, and a friend of ours bought one just to see what it was, and we opened it up. It was Splash, by the way, we bought because Disney was releasing.
That's awesome.
They're not animated. They were really cool, but they were around for like the 60s to the 80s, but VHS killed them. But nobody had them because it was a huge thing. It was really the size of a record. The player was not that big. It would stick out like an 8-track when you put it in. 8-tracks, kids, look it up.
I knew that was coming.
I know it. No, I know what that is. Yeah.
They predate. They're the first cassettes, really. They were portable, but you couldn't fast forward or anything like that. This was more of a disc version. You would have to flip it. I wish I had the time to have prepped and found a way to do the slideshow a bit better. I'll show you one, but when we do the final edited copy, I'll put one in. There were 2 Laserdisc versions, the mini classics and the Disney Favorite Stories versions. On DVD, there's the regular version, which is the 30th anniversary edition, which also exists on Blu-ray. It's on Walt Disney Treasures, Mickey Mouse in Living Color, Volume 2. That's Snowden at the House of Mouse. It's included. It's included in Classic Holiday Stories with a bunch of other shorts. And then it's Walt Disney Animation Classics, Classic Short Films, Mickey Christmas Carol. There's a bunch of DVDs out there, or DVDs for some of you, that it's just one short, and it usually doesn't have the opening credits or something like that in those compilations. So it's been released and released and released. But it's not the only Disney version of A Christmas Carol. In 1992... we get Mickey's Christmas Carol, Muppet's Christmas Carol, which is my absolute favorite adaptation of this. It's fairly close to the story, but they added musical numbers. But the dialogue is straight out of the Dickens.
Yep.
Some great. Michael Caine plays Scrooge. Kermit is Bob Cratchit. Fozziwig replaces Fizzywig.
Yeah.
All the ghosts are original Muppets for this.
Isn't that the birth of Uncle Deadly?
I'm not sure.
I'm not sure.
One of the interesting things is there are the Marley brothers. Instead of just Jacob Marley, you get Jacob and Robert Marley. Which...
No, Uncle Deadly originally came from the Muppet Show.
Okay.
But it doesn't look like he was in this, from what I'm seeing. So
I might just be putting him in there in my mind's eye.
You might be right. I'm not giving you a definite. You're wrong here.
That looked a lot like Deadly.
Yeah.
But it was like not blue. And the whole time I kept seeing him, I was like, God, that looks just like Deadly, but he's not blue.
Yeah.
Your brain made the connection.
Yeah, definitely.
There are so many background Muppets. He's probably in there somewhere.
Oh, I'm sure. And there's also Gonzo and Rizzo narrating the entire thing, which I think is a great addition to this.
What the writers were, I think, banking on in terms of what makes their version special. Dickens, and then like this Greek chorus version of Rizzo come in together to narrate the story, enabled them to be able to between that contemporary style of comedy to that traditional literature and keeping it true to the story. And that was really interesting also was when Michael Caine was first approached about doing the movie, which, I mean, I don't know how doing a Muppets movie, but he said, look, I think the best way to do this is to come in and act like I'm working with, like, the top Shakespearean company in Europe. I'm going to, work with these guys the way that I would expect with, this type of environment. And I think that's why he comes across so literal, so direct, so well on screen. So it plays off of that little comedic part of the puppeting.
Back to Mickey's Christmas Carol, the voice of Goofy was really off for me. It was really off-putting. He has played Goofy a few more times. It was Hal Smith, but
Yeah.
it was just one of the things that was a little off-putting to me. It didn't sound like the Goofy I was used to, and I
It's
think
not Bill Farmer.
right, it's not Bill Farmer, and that's what that really comes down to. I didn't enjoy.
Wait, there's actually 2 actors credited for Goofy in that, because every time they use the Yahoo hoo hoo wee
right.
sound, it's actually the original one that goes back all the way to Art of Skiing. So
Yeah.
there's actually 2 credits for Goofy here.
I saw that. I liked the premise of a Mickey's Christmas Carol, but I don't think, having seen Muppets, that they pull it off in the same fashion that the Muppets do, like with the characters playing roles, like our animated and Muppet friends becoming actors.
I think the difference here is that the Jim Henson Muppet Studio created actors to star in skits and roles for several different movies already. They were already used to this style of storytelling. So, I mean, by this point, they would have perfected it, even though Brian Henson, this was his first directorial experience just after his dad passing away. You know, they already had the same team of writers. The person who did the music, also wrote Rainbow Connection. What was that? Was that Paul? No.
I have to thank one of our listeners. I'm sorry, I forgot. I think it was Jedwa who sent me this. I'm sorry if that's wrong, but this was sent in the chat earlier, and it shows them like as actors on the stage.
Oh,
that's
that's
cool.
neat.
It is really cool.
But thank you. I think it was Jedwa. If it's not, I'm sorry. If I got your name wrong.
I would kill for another Disney movie like that. I think it would be amazing. I think there's plenty of classic stories that we can put these characters into that would be maybe a short in front of a movie, or a collection. I think it's just something we're missing out on. I think, Laurel, you're so right when you're saying Henson created these characters to be actors.
I just think that it carries off so well in this story, and I think that if they had not used the original literature, I almost don't know if I would even watch it, because there are so few versions that use the original words and do it well, like really well, in a way that's contemporary and is enjoyable for all ages. They really hit the ball out of the park on the Muppets version.
And the music that they added for the Muppets is great.
It is. It's very Muppety, but yet it's fresh. It's still singable. It's good.
And I know they use one of the songs in the parks for some of the Christmas shows or background music loops. I forget which one it is, but that is used at Mickey's Very Merry Christmas Party. There is one more Disney version, that unfortunate 2009 Robert Zemeckis Jim Carrey thing. It's done with motion capture. The animation really doesn't hold up. If you look at Avatar, was the same year with motion capture, and these are the first 2 3D movies. So, like modern 3D movies. Avatar still holds up pretty well, but the effects this just does not.
Oh no.
Yeah.
But it is one of the most accurate versions to the original. I mean, it's almost word for word straight through. There's a few, gags thrown here and there to make people laugh with.
Right, there's a lot of extra 3D special effects moments, like lots of
flying through the air.
Or like things coming toward the screen to kind of give you that 3D effect.
Like the Ghost of Christmas Past doesn't leave the house. He turns the room transparent and it flies around, and your Ghost of Christmas Future, present, Ghost of Christmas Present doesn't leave the house and walk through the streets. You see kind of an overhead view as the room turns transparent, just to kind of highlight those effects. But it's also the only version I've ever seen with wanton ignorance in it.
Yep. It does have a really good cast. I mean, you've got Colin Firth, Robin Wright, Carrie Elwes, Gary Oldman, and of course Jim Carrey voices like 6 or 7 different characters as well. So, I mean, the casting is good, but I think storytelling is a little less entertaining.
Is this something that Disney owns the rights to, or is this something that's in the public domain?
No, this is well beyond any.
Yeah.
Christmas Carol is well into the public domain.
Yeah.
There are places that do it every year as a play. There's a theater by us that actually does a very good version every year as a play. So anybody can do it, and that's why it's used. I mean, we said 45 movies. There's so many TV shows like that just do an episode.
Yep.
That tell the same story.
Spoofs. Yep.
Doctor Who.
Yeah, Doctor Who was one of the ones listed, but those are the ones like that are more direct adaptations. I mean, there's even a Doctor Who episode that's interrupts Charles as a reading of A Christmas Carol when ghosts actually start to appear. I believe it's one of the early episodes with Rose and the ninth Doctor, or the.
Yep, they were talking about that in the chat earlier as well.
But I would love to talk about the influence, Mickey's Christmas Carol had in the park, but other than just the way some of the characters dress, you don't see much. There's the window displays in the Emporium, which are amazing.
Yep.
I don't know if they do them every year or that's part of a rotation or they come and go, that they have all of those, but they're really cool. But just other than some of the characters' Christmas outfits, you're really not going to see this because, as we said, this is established Disney characters being thrown into the roles.
Well, I found a few other things, honey. Like this year, the Sunset Seasons Greetings show that's featured on Tower of Terror. It has a segment of Mickey's Christmas Carol in the show on the tower. The Holiday Nighttime Spectacular this year also has some different segments from the movie as well that are featured in their show. There have been a number of years where they've had special appearances of the Cratchits that show up to special events, like as live characters for meet and greets. But really, I think the majority of the influence almost isn't really this movie. It's Christmas is the influence on the parks. Having your Christmas experience in the parks, the Christmas stores, the different holiday season experiences.
And yeah, as we said, Dickens' version of the story accelerated the change of Christmas from a minor holiday where you just have dinner with people to what is now, people have to fight back. Christmas has become such a pop culture thing that it's creeping into October.
Yeah. I think what we really took away from Mickey's A Christmas Carol is go see The Man Who Invented Christmas and get Muppets Christmas Carol and enjoy that, because I think everybody on the panel enjoys that, right?
It's my favorite version by far.
Isn't there one with I'm gonna call him freaking Picard, Sir Patrick Stewart?
I don't know.
Yes, there is.
Yeah, that's a really good one.
Sorry. I was just going to say one of the things I wanted to call out about Mickey's Christmas Carol in terms of the cast is that this is Wayne Alwini, who is one of his earlier appearances as Mickey Mouse, and this is where his wife, Rusty Taylor, is that right? Did I get that right? Yeah, the two of them also feature in the same movie. And this is one of the earliest appearances of the two of them together.
And the most heartwarming thing, Mickey was married to Minnie in that era.
Yeah, Patrick Stewart's one is really good.
There's just so many. It's hard to really talk about them all, and I wish we could, but they said there's 45 versions, so we had to stick to the Disney ones.
Yeah. Oh, I wanted to talk a little bit about the sequels. I use air quotes. Yeah, so there aren't really sequels, but what they do have are some other Disney-related movies that were released. Mickey's Once Upon a Christmas and Mickey's Twice Upon a Christmas, which is the same concept where we've got the Fab Five and some of our base-level actors from the Disney studio, coming in to do skits and stories based off of Christmas stories. Those we happen to also watch in there. It's really from the same concept, and the fact that all the same characters are in there makes it really fun.
Yeah, that's what I thought when I thought I had Mickey's Christmas Carol, and I looked. I'm like, well, this is not that.
They're good though. They're fun.
Yeah, they do a Gift of the Magi, which I mean is always a fun thing. I mean, Bert and Ernie obviously is the go-to Gift of the Magi. Once again, the Muppets just beat the cartoons. Jesse Edwards in the chat said, hands down, that's why I like Puppet Yoda better than CGI Yoda.
Yeah,
there's some about those Muppets, man.
We have one more donation that came in, another $50 from Bear. Thank you very much. We get some music.
Working on it.
Just thank you guys so much for supporting Toys for Tots. And as I said, donate what you can. If you can't donate, just try and spread the word. Try and help us out. Go to Twitter, go to Facebook, go to social media. If you just look for WDWNT, you could retweet our posts out to your people. And we have auctions going on at WDWNT.com/auction. You can find it on the Ntunes page. There's a link there. We got some really cool stuff. We've got those Tower of Terror costume bags. We've got Disney Infinity. We've got some Epcot stuff. We've got some really vintage stuff dating back all the way to the World's Fair. There's some great stuff to bid on. Go there, check it out. No one's taking anything for those donations. It's going straight to Toys for Tots, which is a charity Walt really believed in. He had his characters design the logo with Donald riding the train, or his animators designed the logo with his characters and Donald riding the train. This is something that's really been a part of WDWNT since the beginning. I wish I could tell you what we've raised over the years here, but it's something.
Tom has it.
But we are almost halfway to our $7,002 goal. We are at 3214. We've only got about 5 or so hours to go. So please, go ahead, check out those auctions. We're going to have more stuff coming up, I've heard. I don't know what it is, but I've heard people say they're going to put some more stuff up. We've got, just tweet out, help us out any way you can. If you can't give the money directly, just any way you can. And, that's what I did this here today. And, thank you guys for helping us. And God bless us, everyone.
All right, we're ready to head back over to Skype.
I think we need Jason to help us switch
live.
over. But we'll talk here. I can't turn off the live camera. That Jason has to do.
So I will be giving away my personal possessions. For donations later. I have I'm not auctioning. I have Arena Hulk out of box. Out of box. I have Spider-Gwen. I have Captain Vanilla. I don't even know what this jerk's name was from Rogue One. He was just so boring.
Cassian.
Oh?
Cassian. There he is. Cassian. Ugh. It's just Vanilla McVanellington. I have 2 mini-mates, She-Hulk and Captain Marvel. In the box, Park Stars. I don't know what series this is. Series 3. I was super excited maybe to get Dreamfinder, and then I got freaking Caveman from Spaceship Earth. So I will. These are all my personal possessions that I'm willing to part with, and I have 3 Vinylmations. A woolly mammoth. There's the feetsies. This blue thing, I think it's a Fantasia thing, and then a knight. So I'm willing to give those away, probably when we come back later tonight, but just letting everybody see while I'm on camera stuff of my own possession that I'm willing to give you for the Tots.
We didn't get to talk about merchandise for Mickey's Christmas Carol.
I saw you. It's behind you.
Those were literally the only thing in the Disney store when we went to ask. It's a box of those 6 figures.
Got the figures.
They still smell.
Those are big.
Those are nice looking.
Yeah, it's the size of my hand. Yeah. And we got Marley with
that's really great.
The chains. He's like ghostly. He's clear.
I like those a lot.
These are actually really nice. Like I would keep these for myself and not give them to children.
they are good.
They're pretty nice.
Yeah, there's a lot of these sets out there, but this is one of the nice ones. These look really good.
Yeah, I have Mickey lifting up Tiny Tim as an ornament on my tree.
Oh yeah, that's cool. Yeah, so in terms of the other types of things that we found, I mean, there really isn't a ton, unfortunately, that's representative of this movie. But there's like lots of different kinds of ornaments. There are books. Obviously, the record that existed at one point. DVDs.
Super interested to get a hold of that record and listen to it.
Oh, one of the things I also wanted to mention in terms of our Dickens history. So since I thought this was relevant, since we love Disney parks. There's a theme park called Dickens World in England. It's in Chatham Maritime, just outside of London, and it's basically like this giant warehouse stage type building that was transformed into the land of Charles Dickens, basically Victorian England. And they have an animatronic show. There's a 4D show. They have gift shops.
Wow.
There's a pub. It's crazy. Crazy stuff. And then in terms of merchandise, they have had some sums come out, vinyl-mations, different kinds of figurines and porcelain figures, plastic figurines. The movie was also featured in a couple of different games, one being Disney's Magical Mirror starring Mickey Mouse. There's a shot of Mickey holding Tiny Tim like with his crutch. And they're also featured in Epic Mickey. There's a set of 12 from the entire movie for vinyl-mations. Geely does some canvas artwork of the story. There's pins. There are only a few recorded plush dolls and beanie dolls, but from different time periods, different releases, I'm assuming. But they did release some in the UK that were different, and then some in the US that were different based on different releases.
All right, it looks like we are ready to head back over to Skype. I want to thank you guys all again. Thanks for donating. Stay tuned. We've got plenty of more content coming on. Not all of it's going to be video. Some of it is. I think we're going to Parks Pursuit is our next thing. And then I think we've got another version of WDWNT VR Live coming up later. So thank you guys for listening. And Jason, go ahead and let's switch back to Skype.
All right. Thanks, Ron.